we graduated at a wildly expansive time in global history, and we're still on the upward curve of what John and others have referred to as the Great Acceleration. The world's population has almost exactly doubled since the day of our graduation in 1973, and it's more than tripled since I was born in 1951. Well, Professor Wilson's course really transformed me, though I ended up majoring in SOC-REL. So I didn't really have a plan after college, and I was promptly recruited into the Peace Corps and was sent to Nepal. Now, there may be a slide of the Himalayas there. When I experienced the magnitude of the mountains, landscapes, and biodiversity of the Himalayan range and saw the significant threats to the environment, I felt compelled to at least try to be a part of the solution. That's the Tibetan Plateau on the right and the Gangetic Plain of India on the left, with the elevation dropping from 29,000 feet to 400 feet above sea level within a 50-mile range. More than a quarter of the world's population lives in river drainages that flow from the Himalaya. Well, thanks for the slide. It turned out that the early 1970s were a remarkable time for Nepal. The country had just begun developing its system of national parks, and now 23% of the country has at least some protected area designation. So I jumped into helping propose the creation of the Annapurna Conservation Area, right in central northern Nepal. But this required a new way of thinking, considering that 100,000 people lived within the proposed protected area boundaries. The concept, supported by the royal family, was to create village-level natural resource management systems, which would also provide development assistance, such as schools, tree nurseries, and economic aid, as a trade-off for a consensus among villagers about regulation of local resource use. The concept was supported initially by WWF and spread widely to foreign aid agencies such as the World Bank and USAID, and became what we now know as conservation and development. Well, 30 years later, we can say that this model has worked to conserve and protect landscapes and biodiversity in some areas, but we're continuing to face a relentless drumbeat of economic development, driven partly by the imperatives of multilateral and bilateral aid agencies, such that now conservation and even terms like climate change adaptation serve mainly as a sexy tagline or a buzzword or an afterthought or a noble addendum to the international economic development imperative. Now, motor roads are one of the arteries that bring this development, but they destroy and fragment habitat. Over the past decade, especially, ad hoc, poorly constructed, unstable motor roads are being dug across the entire Himalayan range. And they're transforming it physically, economically, and culturally at an astonishing rate. The south side of Mount Everest, which was designated as a national park and a World Heritage Site in 1977, is a bit of an outlier because the local Sherpas have resisted roads, arguably out of economic self-interest, as they benefit from controlling the lucrative trek and mountaineering trade. One quick thing to add is that the collection of garbage on Mount Everest has been elevated to an environmental triumph, but it's really nothing of the sort. Litter there on Everest is essentially inert, and it's almost entirely an aesthetic issue, and primarily a Western aesthetic at that. But I'd like to mention the case of Chitwan National Park, which is part of a necklace of 13 protected areas along the lowland Nepal-India border. It's known as the Terai Arc landscape. Over the past decade, the tiger and rhino populations have doubled there, despite numerous external threats and plenty of human-wildlife conflict between people and tigers, rhinos, and other wildlife. Ecotourism deserves much of the credit, here at least, if it weren't for wildlife watchers and monitors and a shared sense in the surrounding villages that wildlife and intact habitat are a national and international treasure.